My dad was born on September 12, 1952, in the small town of San Cristobal, Cuba. He was the second child of Alberto Gonzalez and Claudia Rodriguez. Growing up during the dictatorship of Batista and then Fidel Castro, it was normal for my dad to hear gunfire, see the dead victims of these brutal men, and to experience great persecution. For years, his family tried to leave Cuba, but they were unsuccessful. In 1965, Castro implemented a law forbidding any military-aged male from leaving the island. Regretfully, though, my uncle Carlos had already turned 15, so he couldn't leave. But my father was not yet of military age, so in 1966, when he was 14, his family decided to get him out of Cuba. In Havana, he boarded an Iberia DC-8 that was headed for Madrid, Spain, and in his excitement he penned the following words to his mother describing what he saw from the airplane. I recognized various places, Matanzas, Varaderos, and Cardenas. At a distance, I could see the coast of the United States of America and the peninsula of Florida. Below us, I could see the archipelagos of my country, the land where my parents and siblings were left behind, and a country that I may never henceforth return. It was to be 1980 before my dad saw his mother again. In Spain, my father lived with my great-uncle Diomedes for 3 months, and from there he moved to Puerto Rico to live with his aunts and uncles. In 1970, while attending school, he ran away from home and hitchhiked from Miami to New York and then to California. He survived by living under bridges, he lived in abandoned cars and mobile homes, he ate at soup kitchens, and he received food offered by kids wanting to hear his story. That same year, he arrived in San Francisco and lived in a hippie commune. He didn't like drugs or stinky people, so he left and hitchhiked to Los Angeles. You may ask, why was he running away? Well, my dad didn't like being told what to do, so he did what any rebellious young man in his situation would do. He joined the U.S. Army. After basic training, he was sent to work at Cape Kennedy and a year later to Wertheim, Germany. He got an honorable discharge in 1973 and decided to move back to Puerto Rico. Growing up, my dad always told us that his favorite band was the Beatles, but he never got to see them in concert. In the summer of 1974, he got a job in the city of Ponce in a clothing store. One beautiful afternoon around 3:30 on Tuesday, August 27th, my mother visited a store named Las Parejas. In English, that means the couples. She wanted to buy a pair of beige pants, but instead, my dad convinced her to buy a pair of red pants. The next day, she was very excited and told her friends about this tall, handsome guy that she'd met. Truth is, my dad isn't actually tall. He was probably just wearing platform shoes. My parents dated for 5 years, and last month, on August 5th, they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary. A week before they got married, Dad got hired on at Eastern Airlines as a part-time ticket agent at San Juan Airport. Not quite the dream of being a pilot, but he loved that job, and he loved everything that had to do with the airline industry. The following year, in April 1980, a crisis erupted in Cuba when a family hijacked a bus and drove it into the Peruvian embassy. Castro was furious and demanded the family be turned over to his government. But Peru refused. So Castro allowed anyone who wanted to leave Cuba could do so, but only if their families would be willing to pick them up at the port of Mariel. My dad and a friend took a boat to Cuba and picked up my Aunt Nuaris, my Uncle Carlos and his wife, and my cousin Juanis, plus many, many others. Sadly, his mother and father weren't allowed to leave. The voyage back to Key West was met with a huge storm that, were it not for the U.S. Navy's rescue, my father's boat would have capsized. Shortly after the Mariel boat lift, Dad returned to his job at Eastern, and while awaiting the birth of yours truly, he was transferred to Miami. After 2 years there, he was transferred again, this time to Atlanta, Georgia. It was in Atlanta that my dad's first daughter, Jennifer, was born, and then 18 months later, my sister Christy was born. My parents were quite busy. During this time, he began to attend the Hispanic mission at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Morrow, where on May 11th he became a born-again Christian. Ted Ramos was his pastor, and he and his wife Ida were and still are like parents to my mom and dad. In early 1991, Eastern Airlines filed for bankruptcy and Dad lost his job. It was a moment that I will never forget, watching my dad hear the news report that Eastern Airlines was finally shutting down. These were tough times for our family. To make ends meet, he became a pizza delivery man for Domino's. And 8 months before Eastern's closure, he had enlisted in the National Guard. After Eastern shut down, my dad was offered a job in the Guard's Family Support Center, where he helped distribute food and clothing to the families of soldiers deployed in Operation Desert Storm. My parents placed their faith in God during this time, and we never once lacked for anything. In 1993, Dad became a full-time National Guardsman as a recruiter. It was then that he was diagnosed with a cancerous tumor in his right leg. He was told that he would lose his leg to cancer, but he believed that God had a different plan. When the time for his operation came, his doctor found that his tumor had become completely benign. Some years later, his cancer would return, this time in his right kidney. The decision was made to remove it, and thankfully the cancer had not spread and he was given a clean bill of health. After Dad's second brush with death, he realized that he needed to heed God's call to serve in the ministry, and in 2005 he prayed for guidance. It wasn't long before he saw his prayers answered. In 2005, my parents left their church to seek the place where they believed God wanted them to serve. At First Baptist Church of Hampton, two special men, Frank Ross and Buddy Perstrop, were waiting for someone to help the church reach Hispanics. And over the past 6.5 years, my parents have been instrumental in reaching the Hispanic community in Hampton and have led many people to their Savior. All along, there was a plan for that skinny small-town boy from Cuba. He came to believe that through God's power, he could change the lives of others. And through many experiences, some being life-threatening, none has been more rewarding and more fulfilling than serving God. My dad has always dreamed of flying airplanes and taking passengers to their final destinations. But instead, he's become a pilot to hundreds of people, guiding them to God as they fly through this thing we call life.
I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll